Well, if you will keep your Bibles or your bulletins open to that place, that's the text on which our teaching is based this morning. If you have seen the movie, you are familiar with the scene. There at Stirling Bridge, it is 1297. The Scots are lined up on one side and the English on the other. The Scots are thinking about retreating. They are waiting for their leader, and he has not shown up. Many of them have not met him yet. And then all of a sudden, in Mel Gibson's depiction, William Wallace shows up. He says, "Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace." And this young soldier yells out, "William Wallace is 7 feet tall." And then William Wallace says, "Yes, I've heard." And he kills men by the hundreds. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes and lightning bolts from, well, somewhere else. I'm sure you have experienced it, a time when you believed that you were going to meet somebody and you had these expectations of what that meeting would be like, and then you met them and you thought, this is not what I expected at all. Maybe you're like me and you heard Tracy Chapman's Fast Car and you thought, that guy has a great voice. And then you realize, not a guy, right? We've all had these experiences. I thought they would be taller. I thought you'd be shorter. Or whatever. We've been studying the book of Exodus, and for 2 chapters we have been waiting for God to reveal Himself. God has been in the shadows mainly. While He's been present, His care for His people has been secret, although ceaseless. And we've been waiting. God, when are you going to come out? When are you going to step out of the shadows? When are you going to reveal yourself to the people of Israel? When are you going to do something about their situation? Some of you maybe can relate. Perhaps you're here this morning and you're a Christian, and though you've been comforted by God's secret and ceaseless care, you're still wondering, God, when are you going to step out of the shadows and do something? When am I going to feel your presence in my life? When am I going to see you at work in the world? And you're waiting. Or maybe you're here this morning and you're searching. You're not sure if God exists. You're wondering if God exists, and you're saying to yourself, God, if you exist, reveal yourself to me. Make yourself known to me. Meet me. In the text this morning, we find that God finally steps out of the shadows. And He meets Moses. And I would imagine that it blew every one of Moses' expectations. As we look at this very famous story this morning, let's see if it might blow our expectations as well. Let me pray for us as we do that. Lord, this morning I come to you and ask that you would reveal yourself, that you would make yourself known, that you would step out of the shadows, and that you would envelop us with your grace and your power. For Christ's sake, amen. Well, like a good reporter this morning, we're going to look at the where, the how, the who, and the why. The where, the how, the who, and the why. Let's start with the where. It was an ordinary day. Moses got up and he goes to work in his mundane job of tending his father-in-law's sheep, verse 1. For no particular reason that we can tell, they wandered on to the west side of the desert, and there at Mount Horeb it happened. We read that, verse 2, the angel of the Lord appeared to him. There he is, in the middle of nowhere, right in the desert, doing this ordinary thing, in this ordinary place, at this ordinary time. If God were to appear to you, where would it happen? And how? Clive Staples Lewis was an atheist who taught at the University of Oxford. He saw his mother undergo intense suffering at the age of 9, which convinced him that if God existed, he couldn't really exist, or at least it wouldn't be good. By the age of 14, he was solidified in his atheism. And that all changed one night in 1931. He went to dinner at Magdalen College with two of his colleagues, a man named Ronald Tolkien and another man named Hugo Dyke. As they were having dinner that night, they ended the dinner and they decided to go for a walk in the college grounds. They're walking around the college grounds that night, and 1 hour turned to the next, and 1 hour turned to the next, and it was way into the early hours of the morning, 2 and 3 o'clock, and they were having this fascinating, riveting conversation about how captivating ancient myths are. And at one point, Lewis said, they are captivating, they are compelling. Too bad they're not true. At which point, his friend Tolkien suggested that actually the claim of Christianity is that it is the myth made true. And that all the other myths, all the other ancient stories, they point to the human hunger and longing for that story, that myth, which comes true in Jesus Christ. Well, Lewis couldn't get that conversation out of his mind. It was 9 days later, and he was heading to the zoo with his brother Warney. He got into the sidecar of his brother's motorcycle, and they rode across the English countryside together. It was just an ordinary day, an ordinary trip to the zoo. And Lewis writes about that trip, "When I set out, I did not believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And when we reached the zoo, I did." And then and there, in the sidecar of his brother's motorcycle, C.S. Lewis met God and was converted. If you were to meet God, where would it be? A mountaintop? One of the great cathedrals in Europe? Would it be maybe while you were catching this amazing wave, while you were surfing? Where would it be? God meets us in all those places. But most often, God meets us in the mundane, ordinary parts of our lives. Like a sidecar to a motorcycle. Or when we're going off to work. I heard a counselor say recently that he wished he could say that his breakthroughs in counseling with his clients happened when he was in the counseling office and during the counseling sessions. But he says most of the time that never happens. Most of the time, the client's breakthroughs, I sit there and I don't feel like I get through it all, and I don't feel like there's any progress, and the breakthrough happens when they're, in the line at In-N-Out, waiting through the fast food, the drive-through window. God meets us in the ordinary, the mundane, and God meets us when we aren't even seeking Him. You think Moses that morning got up and he thought, I'm going to meet God today? Is that what Moses was thinking when he got up to tend his father-in-law's sheep? I don't think so. Because notice what happens. Moses says in verse 3, I will turn aside and I will see God. No. I will turn aside and I will see this great sight. Moses isn't looking for God, but God was looking for him. Maybe you're here this morning and you aren't looking for God. You don't even believe He exists. You're here because of a parent or a friend, and you're trying to appease them or be kind and gentle and friendly and courteous and respectful. And you aren't even seeking God. But have you ever considered the fact that maybe God is seeking you right now, in this place, at this time? See, God seeks us in the mundane. God seeks us in the ordinary events of our life. That's how He sought Moses. That's where He met Moses. That's where Moses had an encounter with God, in the ordinary. But though it was an ordinary place and an ordinary time, he did not encounter Him in an ordinary way. Which brings us to the how. The how. The reason why this story is so famous is because as Moses is walking along there in the desert next to Mount Horeb, verse 2 says that the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Moses and the burning bush. Now, this is strange on any account. Some of you may be thinking, well, I guess religious people believe that kind of stuff, and they're just gullible. But me, I'm not a religious person. I believe in science and trust in that, and therefore, I can't believe this kind of thing. Look, this isn't any more easy for me or Moses to believe than it is for you. Look, he says, he looked, and behold. I mean, Moses is surprised. This is inexplicable. Bushes that burn are consumed. What's going on here? But that's how it often is. God uses inexplicable things to get our attention, that we might meet Him. You see, we all have burning bushes. It might not be a literal burning bush, but we all have burning bushes. We all have inexplicable things, and that's how God gets us to meet Him. That's how He gets our attention. Just think about it this way. If you're not a Christian here, then we all have basic assumptions, presuppositions about the world and how the world works. And perhaps you think God doesn't exist. And if He does exist, He's not active in the world. Well, if God were to meet you, that's going to upend all those presuppositions and assumptions. It's going to be a paradigm bomb that comes right into the middle of your life. These inexplicable, unexplainable things that you're going to have to rethink things. And it can look like an inexplicable person. Perhaps you are convinced that Christians are not very smart people. That you couldn't really be intellectual and be religious. And then what happens? Maybe you start to read more and more and you find out that there are these brilliant scientists who are Christians and brilliant people throughout the world who are Christians. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second. I guess theism, belief in God, is compatible with intellectual pursuits in science. That's what happened to Lewis, actually. He was thinking about, he was an atheist, but then he starts reading all literature voraciously because he was an English professor, and he starts noticing that some of his favorite thinkers are Christians, and so then he at least had to come to the point of theism because it was a paradigm bomb. Maybe you think all Christians are judgmental, and then you meet some that are actually gracious and warm and kind and loving, and it's a paradigm bomb. You have to rethink. It could look like an inexplicable person. It could look like an inexplicable idea. Maybe you believe in naturalistic materialism, that the world is just, time plus chance, and all of it is just matter. But deep down, you know that humans are valuable, and you get upset about injustice and things like that. And you find that you experience something like love, and it's powerful, and it's real. And you realize that your worldview, the way that you look at the world, naturalistic materialism, doesn't make sense of any of that stuff. And it's a paradigm bomb. It can look like an inexplicable person. It can look like an inexplicable idea. It can look like an inexplicable experience. Maybe you don't believe that God exists. Maybe you don't believe that He could ever meet you. And then you come to a Christian worship service and you sense His presence powerfully. We heard a testimony like that this summer. It's a paradigm bomb. Or maybe it's an inexplicable power. Like the power of addiction. The power of meaninglessness. And you thought you were in control, and then all of a sudden you realized that you were not free. That's what happened during World War II. People decided that God wasn't active in the world and He wasn't involved. And then all of a sudden they realized that if all these people are doing all this bad stuff, and these are just my neighbors, then some other power, there are powers at work that are greater than just me. It could be any of these things, but God uses these things. He uses burning bushes to get our attention. And that's why, if you are becoming Christian, oftentimes what happens is before that moment, you wonder if you're going crazy. You think, am I going crazy? Don't you think Moses thought that when he saw a burning bush? Am I going crazy? Am I hallucinating in the middle of the desert? But he wasn't going crazy. He was meeting God. And that's why you can't come to God with a certain set of criteria or assumptions that you put on him and say, you must look like this or you must be like this in order to exist. I hear this all the time, I can't believe in God. I can't believe in a God who would send people to hell. I can't believe in a God who would require this kind of obedience. I can't believe in a God who is like this. Or, on the other side, I would only believe in God if he would write my name in the sky. I would only believe in God if he would appear to me in this kind of vision. I would only believe in God in this kind of way. But when you do that, when you set these kind of criteria on God, don't you realize that at the end of the day, what you want to meet, who you want to meet, is simply a God in your own image, a God of your imagination. You would never, never, ever say that someone should interact with you that way. They say, Kyle, I've got these prior assumptions about who you are and what you should be, and I'm pretty sure that you don't have strawberry blonde hair. I'm pretty sure your hair is brown, and so, therefore, since I'm seeing you with strawberry blonde hair, you don't exist. We would never do that. And we don't do it with God either. No, you have to encounter him for who he is. Which brings us to the who. The who. And we find out who God is in this text through two primary means. We have to look, to understand who God is, we have to look at the symbol and we have to look at the name. The symbol and the name. First, the symbol. We find in verse 2 that an angel of the Lord appears to him in a flame of fire in the midst of a bush. But we learn in verse 4 that this angel of the Lord, it says, God himself called to him out of the bush. So there's an identification between the angel and God. In other words, God is calling to him out of this flame of fire. The symbol through which God is revealing himself is fire. And that's actually quite common in the Bible. We saw it with Abraham in Genesis 15, where God shows himself to be and reveals himself as fire. We'll see when he leads the children of Israel through a fiery pillar. We see that at Pentecost when God descends in the form of a tongue of fire on people. God is always revealing himself as fire. Now, why fire? Well, fire, I would suggest you, does two things. On the one hand, fire is attractive. It's mesmerizing. It draws us in. So we have fireplaces and we like to sit by them. You've ever been by a campfire at night where people are talking? Where are they looking? They're all mesmerized, looking into the fire. And yet at the same time, fire is kind of scary. It's kind of uncontrollable. It kind of repels us a bit. And we find that the same thing happens in Moses' encounter with God. In verses 3 and 4, he's drawn in. He's even called, Moses, Moses. But then look at verse 5. Do not come near. Do not come near. Moses, Moses, come in. Do not come near. Which one is it, God? Do I come in or do I not? You see, fire is like that. It's at the same time attracts us, but it also repels us. Because there's something uncontrollable about it. It's something scary about it. And so Moses, we find in verse 6, he hides his face and he's afraid to look, verse 4. Why? Because this God is holy. And the ground on which Moses walks, verse 5, is holy ground. And Moses is not holy. And Moses cannot contain or control this God. There's something that is scary about him. You can't put him in a box. On my day off, we like to go to the zoo. And after we're done seeing the giraffes, which may be Nee's favorite, we get to go see my favorite thing. And this is very characteristic for me. I think it's fitting that I love monkeys. And so we go to the gorilla cage or window. Have you been here at the zoo? Santa Barbara Zoo is amazing. And you walk into this thing, and one day we come into this little, cave area with a glass door, and the gorilla, this huge gorilla, is standing right there with its face pressed up against the window. And I'm like, this is awesome. I mean, these things are so big and powerful and intelligent. I mean, they're smarter than me. That's not saying much. And I want to come close. And so I'm coming close to the window. But there's something about it as it's drawing me in and bringing me closer that's also, I'm a little scared. I'm not going to lie. You stay back, Neve. And I'm coming close. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting very close to this window. I'm like about up here. I'm looking at its wrinkles and its face and nose and all this stuff. And then it bangs the thing. I jump back. Neve runs forward. You know who's scared now? Neve's my daughter. Anyway, so there's something about this gorilla that it draws me in. It's attractive, and yet at the same time, something that it's about is scary. It's uncontrollable. It's powerful. It's like fire. It's like meeting God. I'd suggest to you that there's something about God and the possibility of meeting with God that attracts us all, that draws us in. If God is real, we want to have an encounter with Him. We want to meet Him. But there's also something about Him that is kind of scary. And we hide. We hide in all sorts of ways. We keep busy. We have our addictions. We have all kinds of things, but we hide our face because while we want to meet God, we don't want to meet God. You see? It's this paradox. And it's the same thing with Moses here. Because God is like fire. He's holy. He dwells in unapproachable light. And we cannot control Him or contain Him or put Him in a box. We've learned about God, who God is, through this symbol, but we also learn about who God is through the name. There's this interesting exchange in verses 13 through 15 that Moses has with God where he says, if I go to the people of Israel and I go to Pharaoh and I said, I've been sent to deliver you from the Egyptians, to lead you out, and the people of Israel ask me, who sent you? Moses is like, what am I going to tell them? The burning bush? I mean, what am I supposed to say to the people? And then God responds in verse 14. I am who I am, He said. Say to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Verse 15, God also said to Moses, say to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I will be remembered throughout all generations. Now, there's an ambiguity here with the name. If you look down in your footnote, for instance, in the ESV, it'll say it. The name has puzzled commentators for a long time because it's hard to know how to translate this. Should we translate it, I am who I am? Should we translate it, I will be who I will be? I am what I am? How are we to translate this name and what God says here? And I think that the ambiguity is actually intentional. I think it's a beautiful ambiguity. Because what it suggests is that, on the one hand, God is the great I am. He's the self-existing and self-sustaining one. He is before all things. In Him all things hold together. He is the one who is completely transcendent and utterly holy. To be holy is not just to be morally pure, but it implies that. To be holy is to be utterly set apart. See, no one and nothing can compare themselves with God. He is higher than our highest thoughts and more wonderful than our greatest imagination. He is incomprehensible. This is who God is. He's the I am. Holy and utterly transcendent. And yet, God is also, at one and the same time, unimaginably imminent and personal and involved in people's lives. He is the I will be who I will be. I will be with you. You will be my people, and I will be your God. You see, this strikes at the covenant, the idea that God has actually made a covenant with people, that He comes to dwell with them, that He actually wants a personal relationship with them. That He is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That He is even the God of your father. Not fathers, Father. God seeks, and this is the heart of Christianity, for you to have an individual, personal relationship with the transcendent, holy God of the universe. This is what the name is about. But how do we have this relationship with God? How can we have a relationship with a holy, transcendent God? Well, God answers that question in verse 8. Look, He says, I have come down. I have come down to deliver them. I have come down. You see, what every other system or religion or approach to God says is that meeting God is about us working our way up to God, or us thinking our way up to God, or us somehow going up to God. But the biblical story from beginning to end is about a God who comes down. In creation, He came down to get His hands dirty. And in redemption, He comes down. And ultimately, He will come down in Jesus Christ to meet with His people, to dwell with them, that they might have an intimate, personal relationship with Him. And that's the direction. God comes down. So here's the question. Do you have a God that is both unimaginably, utterly holy and transcendent, and at the same time, immanent and personal? Because I feel in my own life, and as I look in the lives of people, and I look at communities as a whole, I feel like it's hard to hold these two things together. In fact, I think that we often tend to approach God as one or the other. We often tend to approach God as more one or the other. You see, for some of us in here, we have an easy time approaching God as transcendent and holy. What moves you to worship is the fact that God is the great I am, that He is holy, 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 that He is the King, immortal, invisible, the only wise God to whom all honor and glory should be for both now and forever. And that moves you to worship, and you sing holy, 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 and you sing it with gusto. But you need to also know that God cares about a personal relationship with you, that He's involved in the details of your life. You need to know that He is not unaware or uninvolved in the sufferings of this world. Look, verse 7. I know their sufferings. I have seen the affliction of my people, and I know their sufferings. And yes, you need to glory in the holiness and the majesty and the transcendence of God. But you also need to see God as your lover and your friend. You need to be able to sing, Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly, while the near waters roll, while the tempest still is high. You see, for some of us, that's a bit uncomfortable. Jesus, lover of my soul. For some of us, it's a bit uncomfortable and to use emotive expressions in worship. But you need to learn that. Because Jesus is your friend, your counselor, your shepherd. Others of us, that's not hard at all for us to sing, Jesus, lover of my soul, let me to thy bosom fly. What moves us is the fact that God loves us and He has a personal, intimate relationship with us. And we love to sing those songs. In our relationship with Him, we think of Him as our friend and our counselor, and it is sweet and it is good. But you also need the holy God, the transcendent God. You need to remember that the Jesus who calls you friend also is your master and commands your destiny. You need to know that the Jesus who comes to dwell with you, who came down so that you could have such an intimate relationship that you could lay your head on His chest and that you could kiss His feet, that same Jesus, He dwells in unapproachable light. You need to realize that your God is a consuming fire. And you need to learn to worship Him in reverence and in awe. Because while Jesus is your friend, I'm not sure he's your homeboy. And he's not your girlfriend who you sing love songs to, or like prom songs to Jesus and slow dance with. No, he's the God of the universe, to whom we bow, to whom we hide our faces, whom we cry out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies. See, in worship, are you ever so overwhelmed by the holiness of God that you are somewhat afraid? That you find awe and reverence come into your being, that you want to hide your face? You need to. You need to have a God who is both transcendent and holy, and a God who is also immanent and personal. And we have to hold these things together. You know why? Because that's who God is. And we all need an encounter with the real God. The real God. So we've looked at the where, the how, the who. What about the why? Why does God meet Moses? Why does he have this encounter with him here? Well, look in verses 7 and 8. It says that when then the Lord said, I surely have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and a broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Notice that when God comes to Moses here, it isn't simply for Moses. When God has an encounter with Moses, it isn't something that Moses can just tuck away, that's just between him and God and he can keep to himself. Now you see, the God who calls us in to meet him also sends us out in service. In fact, God never invites us in to meet him without sending us out in mission. Look, in verse 10, God comes to give Moses a call. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Come, he invites him in to meet him, that I might send, that he might go out in mission. And it's the same with us. Every call of God, we must respond to. And it comes, every meeting of God, every time we meet God, every encounter with God comes with a call to salvation, a call to vocation, a call to relationship, and a call to mission. And how are you going to respond to that call? You who have met him, how are you going to respond? Well, how does Moses respond? Well, throughout the rest of this chapter and the next, we see how Moses responds. And that is he gives excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse. 5 times in these 2 chapters, Moses gives excuses as to why he can't possibly go to Pharaoh. 5 times. We see the first one there in verse 11. Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And you see, this is what often happens. Often happens when we meet God. That when we meet God, all our insecurities come bubbling out. Over the next 2 chapters, every one of Moses' insecurities is going to come bubbling to the surface. Who am I? I can't speak. I can't do this. And you know that insecurity as well. Because if you've met God, then you know what it's like to stand in the presence of the holy God and feel insecure and inadequate. And if you have heard his call to mission, then you know what it means to feel like that you are inadequate. Who am I that I should lead a community group? Who am I that I should talk to my neighbor about Jesus? I'm stumbling and bumbling, and I don't have good words, and my theology's not very tight, and I don't think well on the spot. Who am I? Who am I that I should pastor a church? Who am I? See, whenever we meet God and hear his call to mission, we feel these inadequacies. But how does God respond to our inadequacies? Well, just think about this. How does your mother respond to your inadequacies? Or how did she? You know, when you said, Mom, I can't do it. I'll tell you how our mothers respond. They say, oh, buck up. You're awesome. You're great. You're going to do wonderful, honey. You know, like Neve, we've been counting with her, and we're counting to 5. And she does 1, and then she says 5, and then she claps for herself. And you know what we do? We clap, and we say, that is great. You're amazing. Good job, Neve. Good job. You did it. She didn't do it. You did it. That's how mothers do, right? Well, what about your counselor? What about your therapist? If you were to come with all your insecurities and inadequacies, how would they respond? They would say, well, Moses, you have an insecurity problem, and you need to get some confidence. Your self-esteem is too low. So let's start with some baby steps. Do some things that you can succeed at, and you know you can, and then build up so that then you can go to Pharaoh. That's what you need to do. But here's the thing. I got news for you. God ain't your mama, and God ain't your counselor. Because he responds in a completely different way. He never denies Moses' inadequacy. He never rebukes him. He never says, oh, you're okay, you can do it. He never once says that. But what does he say? How does God respond to our sense of inadequacy, our deep insecurity? Look, verse 12. But I will be with you. But I will be with you. But I will be with you, and this shall be a sign to you. I will be with you. And there it is again. There's that name. I will be with you, Yahweh. I am with you. I am the God who is with you. You see, how does God respond to our inadequacy and insecurity? He doesn't say, oh, you're okay. No, he says, you're right, Moses, you're inadequate. But you know what? I am adequate. You're insufficient, but I am sufficient. And my sufficiency, I am the all-sufficient one, and my sufficiency is greater than your insufficiencies. And my sufficiency will fill your insufficiencies. And my adequacy will cover your inadequacies. God says, you are not, but I am. And because of that, you will. You will succeed. Who am I? Who am I? Well, that's not the question. Who is he? Who is he? And here's the question. I mean, just notice who he's doing this with. Notice who he's doing it to. To Moses. Moses, the guy who's a murderer, who's a coward, who's in exile, who's married the wrong people. He married someone who wasn't an Israelite. And Moses is completely out, and he's a whiner. He's going to give excuse after excuse after excuse over the next 5 chapters. Moses. And yet God calls him. How is Moses able to stand in the presence, sinful Moses, of a holy God who is a consuming fire without himself being consumed? How is he able to do that? How is he able to serve God in mission without being burnt up himself? How is he able to do that? Well, we get the hint of it there in verse 8, when God said, I will come down. I will come down to deliver you. And God did come down. In the person of Jesus Christ, God came down. And he took on flesh. And he knew our sufferings more than we could ever imagine. And he said, I am the all-sufficient one. And he took on all our inadequacies and all our insufficiency and every insecurity that we have and all the guilt and all the shame. And he took it on himself. And he said, I am enough. And my work is enough. And it is finished. I will come down and deliver them. And it's because of that that Moses can stand in the presence of a holy God, and like that bush, he cannot be consumed. See, how do you stand in the presence of a holy God? Holy, 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 when you are so unholy? How can I when I am so unholy? Because God came down. And he took every inadequacy that we ever had and every insufficiency and all our sin, and he took it with him to the cross, and they were burned up there when God poured out his unmitigated wrath so that we might be holy and clean and pure. And who tells us about this? I mean, Moses kind of gets a bad rap here because we find all these bad things about him. We're going to see all this stuff. I mean, who ratted out Moses? Oh, wait. If we're to take the biblical witness at its face value, then Moses did. Moses ratted out Moses. Moses was able to tell us about all his insecurities and all his failures and every time that he messed up. Why? Because God came down. And because of God, because he is the great I am, and because he was with Moses, Moses was able to admit all his failures and all his shame and all his insecurity. And you can too. Do you know this God? Have you met him? That's an invitation. Consider it now. Amen.